Hello and welcome. This video is going to be a mostly complete overview of Shadow Empire subunits, which is effectively a why to use or not to use each of them, made by me. I stream live to Twitch under the username Willcol100, and I upload videos, usually the local recordings of those streams, to YouTube under the username Willcol100, although I'll upload tutorials and overviews like this to Twitch or to YouTube directly, as they won't be streamed live. Mainly do the editing. This is the second time I've tried to record this, although I'm going to record this bit over multiple different parts to make it a little bit easier to edit together. This presentation is about 100 slides long, just because of, well, how many subunits there are to go over and how I've broken it up. So, starting off, we're going to have a sort of an overview slide here of what's going to be covered in this presentation. First, I'm going to go through a little bit of introductions and caveats. Then we're going to go into the subunit categories, go over some of the weapon and armor tables, type tables particularly, finish off with the last bit of caveats, and then get into units by type. So first, a good introduction to probably flesh out what we're going to be talking about here is what is a subunit in Shadow Empire. Subunits are the parts that make up a unit that move around the map in Shadow Empire. To give you a sort of a tabletop wargaming equivalent, if you're like doing a platoon scale game, your units in a platoon scale game are often your platoons, which would be made up of multiple fire teams. If you were to describe that in Shadow Empire terms, right, the platoon is the unit. You've got to move the unit around together as one bit, and it's made up of different subunits. And much like in tabletop gaming, where a model might get shot off the board, but your unit's still there because you still have some members of the unit. Same sort of thing happens in Shadow Empires. When one of your units gets shot up, you may lose subunits, but you don't usually lose the whole unit unless you're encircled or something. As a side effect in-game, a subunit is the small scale that units can be reinforced on, built, and destroyed on. Most units will have 5 or more subunits, and most units that have 5 or more subunits take additional penalties when they're at 3 or fewer subunits. Air, for example, is a possible exception here, where I think the default the unit size for that is actually 3 subunits instead of 5. This tabletop wargaming reference is what you may hear me refer to subunits as models. This is the in-game technical term is subunit. A design of a subunit is a model. Technically in-game, hence place where you design subunits being the model designer. So you use the model designer to design a model, which is sort of the collection of of a single design of a subunit, and to some degree they'll be interchangeable. The models will be interchangeable, some subunits are. So a little bit more, couple more caveats as we get into this guide. The game Shadow Empire favors a combined arms approach to combat and maneuver warfare. This is an overview of subunits and not units. I may later follow this up with an order of battles, or OOBs, to discuss units. I will mostly refrain from discussing mixed units or unit sizes in this guide. An overview of subunits is made using the in-game blueprint tab with a nearly complete tech tree. One reason why I'll be resisting discussing units, because the normal sort of non-custom units, there's a finite list of them that you can go ahead and discover and research. But there is an in-game sort of battle group system which allows you to make custom units. So we're mostly going to be talking about the subunits here because you can make whatever units you kind of want within reason. So when we're talking about, for the example of the subunits I'm doing today, this is the tech tree that I used to pull up the blueprints. So if the blueprints look different from yours, it may be because I have a tech unlocked and completed that you don't, or vice versa. Maybe you have some of the linear techs farther along than I do, instead of the binary ones, which are either on or off. Going at it from a caveats on tech standpoint, there are a couple techs that do very heavily affect unit effectiveness. An example are the hyper explosive ammo and actinide tip ammo. Both of them affect weapons that have ammo. such as small arms, howitzers, high-velocity guns, RPGs, rockets. I tend to also refer to these as kinetic weapons. Hyper-explosive gives 50% soft attack and counterattack, whereas hard attack, whereas Actinite gives hard attack equivalent. This particularly affects the balance of small arms and how you might evaluate the progression in tech with small arms. Also, there's another tech called ablet coating, which effectively functions as a nerf to lasers and beams. That provides about 4% HP per 5mm armor, up to about 40% against lasers, or 2% HP per 5mm of armor, up to 20% against beams. When we're going in and evaluating small arms, I will treat ablet coating like a nerf to firepower. It's technically a buff to HP, so because of the non-linear interactions of those two, it may over-under evaluate the effect of ablet coating on lasers and beams in particular. In addition, there are two techs, ammo compactation and lightweight ammo, that affect the carrying and shoot rate for ammo. Ammo compactation allows you it says you can carry 33% less ammo. Basically, your unit will shoot 33% less ammo in fighting. Of course, it only affects ammo. It doesn't affect energy weapons. And because they shoot less, they carry less. By default, your troops would carry, I think it's 1 full round of attacking and 1 full round of defending. So with ammo compactation in effect, they shoot 33% less, so they'll just carry 33% less. This can be useful for logistical purposes, as it basically lowers the logistical weight of your unit's shooting. Lightweight ammo, on the other hand, makes it so your units can carry 50% more ammo, irrespective of the amount that they shoot. So it basically gives you a half a turn leeway before your units run out of ammo. It doesn't affect how much they shoot, and depending upon why you're having logistical issues, it may in fact help you with those logistical issues. Because units can only request what they're missing. So if you're in a supply situation where you're like in yellow or some other supply state, instead of being on the road or rail line, your units can request more, and thus if they're only receiving 80% of their supplies, if they request more than they're actually going to shoot in a turn, their ammo will improve, even if they technically have the ability to request more. Right? So there is a reason to sometimes pick up lightweight ammo. It's maybe not as strong as ammo compactation as far as logistical reasons. The game is broken, or the game breaks the subunits up into various different types. For categorization here, I'm going to define them by their defense type. So subunits are broken into various types for defense. You've got infantry, which are pretty much everyone who walks around or rides in trucks or APCs. You have guns, which are old guns that are too large to sort of be fired while carried. So you think of these sort of as your towed weapons. And I tend to use them as towed weapons. So I tend to use some sort of towing vehicle to move them around. You've got your motorized, which has one unit type in it right at the moment, is trucks. You have tanks, which are all armored hard targets, even if you don't give them armor. As a side effect, the tank category for defensive purposes is actually the largest category. Includes things that you would not normally think of as tanks. Because in-game you can arm them. So they're going to include the SPGs and all the sort of rocket launchers and the ICBMs and that sort of stuff. I suppose that's a good point to bring up. This categorization is based on defensive purposes. For maneuverability and stuff, you might break them up a little bit different. You've got walkers, which is a subcategory. Is its own category. These are units that can generally walk into mountains, but are armored sort of like tanks. They have a different mobility type and different, presumably as a side effect, different target prioritization. You have protector, which are units that will attempt to intercept enemy attacks and redirect them to themselves. You have low air and high air, which are basically planes that attack ground targets at low and high altitude, respectively. Which is a somewhat valuable perspective from discussing if your unit can attack or not attack, or be attack or not attack them. Okay, And here is the model tech tree showing all the possible subunits. This is what it looks like when you've discovered all the subunits. In this case of the model tech tree, there was no viable way to make it heavy Thopter, which is why there's no model image on Thopter. You can also see what it looks like when you've made multiple designs of a given model. So for example, the infantry model here, the infantry subunit, we have 4 different models of infantry designed, which would give us a variety, well, give us basically 4 different types of subunits that we can make that fit in the subunit subcategory, or the infantry subunit category. As such, we have the infantry class for defensive purposes, which contains a total of 7 units. The gun class, which contains a total of 5. The motorized class, which contains a total of 1. The good old truck. Walkers, which I've got slightly out of order here for fitting on slides purposes, which has a total of 2. As I brought up earlier, tanks, which is sort of the largest category, because it's all vehicles. Basically, everything that has tank armor fits in the tank category, even if you don't armor them. So you get various things that you might not armor. You might not think of a rocket launcher as a tank because you haven't put any armor on them. But for defensive purposes, they're classed as tanks. You have the protector subclass, which contains the mobile shield and the weld area shield. And then I've put them here as aircraft. This is because whether an aircraft is classed as low or high is actually designated by the design, the model design. And thus you can have a low attack aircraft and a high attack aircraft of the same sort of model class. We'll get into that more when we get to the aircraft section. This is a game, interestingly enough, that was apparently initially designed to allow you to have tech levels below the minimum starting level. So various, in this case for armor thickness unlocks at various levels. Tech 2 unlocks up to 100mm, Tech 3 unlocks up to 150, Tech 4 up to 200, Tech 5 up to 300, Tech 6 up to 400. And there are some armor that would be technically unlocked at effectively Tech 1 or Tech 0. A reminder, tech level in this game is the number of techs research square rooted. So tech level 2 would be 4, 3 is 9, 4 is 16, 5 is 25, etc. And yes, the game was built for tech levels lower than the minimum, apparently, because the game always starts you with at least 10 techs. Used to be 9, but it's now 10. Because in the game you can start on tech level 3, tech level 4, tech level 5 start. Tech level 3 obviously would imply that you should have 9 techs, and originally you, in like the release patches, you would. At some point they added another tech that started in the base set, so you technically start with 10 techs, which is a little above 3, but it doesn't really change anything. So yeah, by default you basically start up with 150mm of armor, regardless of what tech level you start with, and all the armor is unlocked at tech 6. As far as thickness is concerned, there are other techs that are required for various specialty types like polymer and liquid. Similar sort of logic for gun weapon sizes. The higher tech level, the bigger the gun you can use. You get up to 300mm at tech level 5, which is a tech level you can start with. And even if you start with a minimum tech level, you have up to 150mm available to you. It's tech level 3. Same sort of thing with the rockets and the lasers. You always have some rockets and lasers unlocked, so if you reach the specific tech, so for example rockets, you need to research rockets. For missiles, you have to research missiles. Lasers, you have to research lasers, for example. If you just beeline to that tech, you might not have actually advanced very much in tech level, but there will always be some of those weapons available. The big advantage of getting your tech level up is you get the bigger ones. And all of them are pretty much getting unlocked by the time you get to level 6, and that's not actually very hard to do in-game. So here's the weapon type table. Often when we're going to get into discussing subunits, if a subunit is going to be restricted to a particular weapon type, I will treat that penalty from the weapon type as a penalty to the unit. But it is important to note that some of these penalties are actually weapon type penalties, which will come up in cases when you're doing things like tanks. So for example, tanks can have both howitzers, high velocity guns, or energy weapons. You get to pick, which means you're basically getting to pick which of the attack/defense types you're being penalized on. So are you penalizing your hard attack, or are you penalizing your soft attack? you can make that choice there. However, whenever you're doing infantry, all the infantry subunits that are infantry, which will be a little bit confusing, so I'll have to reinforce that when we get to the infantry, use conventional small arms. All the bazookas, except for the type that uses, except for the designs that use the atomic weapon, are using hollow charge, etc. Right? So there'll be subunits where the weapon type's kind of built into the unit by the side effect that you get one weapon type, where, like, for example, the robotic infantry only get conventional or energy small arms. You do also have the weapon versus armor type, and this is the table for that. Certain weapon types do bonus or reduced damage against certain armor types. The big one you can see here, that will come up a lot, or that could come up a lot, is that shields take reduced damage from basically everything that isn't really high-tech, so except for plasma and atomics. Physical tends to do reduced damage against armor. I believe the none category here is actually what infantry are technically classed as wearing. So it's important to note that your infantry just have armor, but it's not classed as metal, not classed as polymer, not classed as liquid. But the bigger tanks, for example, you get once you've unlocked them, you can select swapping the polymer or swapping the liquid, which can change the firepower effects against them. I'm going to carry out one last caveat, sort of personal bias. Personally, I tend to evaluate units sort of from the perspective of, because of natural stacking on attacking, of specifically attacking bonuses to attacking when attacking, that I tend to value defensive bonuses when it comes to attacking. So I tend to like to put armor on the units I want to attack with. Good old-fashioned, you put armor in your tank so your tank can make it into the attack and survive the attack. This is partially to make it through the attack startup penalty. This is partially because when you're attacking, often the unit you're going to attack at the beginning of your attack is screwed, let's just say. But because of the game's combined arms offensive mechanics and the fact that it often favors maneuver warfare, let's say you've screwed that first unit. Well, that usually hasn't won you the battle because your goal is probably to encircle the enemy, so you can cut them off from supply and destroy them in totality. So you need to be able to not just win a battle, but win battles back and back and back and back. So you're really more, when attacking, worried about taking lots of attrition. So you usually want your attacking units, weirdly, to have more defensive stats. At least the defensive stats that they can bring into battle with them. Conversely, because of natural stacking of defensive bonuses, right, most of your defensive units have some degree of a capacity to dig in. I tend to actually value firepower stats when defending. This is because the flip side is also the case. If the enemy's attacking you, there is a damage predictor. They can sort of predict what the conflict exchange is going to be. So they tend to only take fights they're expecting to win, meaning often you're pretty screwed if you're actually being attacked. If you've got a solid line and you're being attacked, your units are probably going to have a bad day. And this is, if you just stack defenses, all you're going to do is reach a point where your units aren't getting attacked and they're sort of standing there staring at each other. Whereas if you're stacking firepower, when an attack happens, at least you're hopefully inflicting attrition. So you're going to see this sort of weird duality of effects, right? I tend to value what you sort of think of as aggressive attacking stats on my defending units and defending stats on my attacking units. And for those of you who don't know the attacking startup penalty, most melee units have an attack startup penalty of minus 75% firepower on the first round, minus 50% on the second round. Combat goes up to 10 rounds. So you're basically penalized for the first couple of rounds where the defender isn't. This is ignored by various mechanics. For example, artillery ignore it, which is one way that sort of combined arms operation comes into effect. Right? So you can do an infantry attack backed by artillery. The infantry in the opening phases of that attack are not going to be very effective, but your artillery will be. So on and so forth. You can bring tanks in. The tanks will suffer a penalty, but the tanks also bring pretty good defense stats, so on and so forth. Okay, and that brings us to the infantry subsection, where we have infantry, robotic infantry, machine guns, bazookas, motorbike infantry, jetpack infantry, and manpads. So infantry is generally, as we go through this sort of overview of all the subunits, infantry is what we're going to sort of compare everything else to. And yes, just to be confusing, infantry is both a type of subunit, a class of subunit, as well as being a part of various unit groups, operational names, light infantry, infantry MG, etc. Generally, when I refer to infantry, I refer to infantry. I will tend to refer to other things like machine gun infantry, or bazooka infantry, or motorbike infantry by the other moniker, right? So machine guns, motorbikes, etc. In the case of infantry, infantry have their firepower halved for attacking before other modifiers, because they only use small arms, whether it be energy or regular small arms. Their attack power is halved against hard targets. And these sort of generic infantry here eat 1 food per subunit. One thing infantry is going to share with all other infantry class subunits is they're probably going to have basically the same list of defense armor, personal armor. And to a more or less extent, they're going to have pretty similar weapon techs. So here's the sort of weapon table for the infantry subunit and its weapons. You'll notice sort of a gentle progression here in tech weapons from what you unlock at the beginning of the game, which is slug throwers and carbines, through automatic rifles, into the Gauss rifles, into the laser rifles, into the plasma rifles. One weird outlier here, which is the gas-powered carbine, which has had an interesting history as far as the game is concerned. It was initially moved early in the tech tree. When that happened, it got buffed. Because of the effects of that buff and the fact it was early in the tech tree, it was probably a little overpowered. It got nerfed. It right now sits as sort of an interesting anomaly, which is it's a low ammo-consuming weapon. So if you're struggling with ammo, swapping units to gas-powered carbines, or gas-powered weapons in general, will conserve ammo. It's more ammo-efficient per firepower than basically any of the other weapons here. But ammo is usually a thing you will eventually solve. That's a problem that will be solved, and then gas-powered carbines effectively become obsolete. You may notice that there are two lines on this table that are missing. We'll go to the next slide, and that will reveal. The contents of those 2 lines are, you notice there was sort of gentle progression going up the tech levels. But we weren't really accounting for the fact that there is hyper-explosive ammo, and actinide tip ammo, and ablet coating, which are techs that affect your physical weapons, so your charged Gauss, your Gauss rifles, and techs that reduce the effectiveness of laser weapons. So if you were to treat the ablet coating as if it was a firepower malus, it technically isn't. It's technically an HP buff. That's around about where laser rifles would sit after being nerfed by ablet coating. And if you were to apply hyper-explosive ammo and actinide tip ammo as if they're firepower bonus, which is actually what they are, that's where about charged Gauss would sit. Which does result in a situation of late game, you're probably better off with charged Gauss than laser rifles. Although, at some point, the energy benefits of using an energy weapon, which is that energy doesn't have a logistical upkeep transport problem. If you've got the energy infrastructure, that can be a big help in your logistics. So at some point, you may want to swap over to energy weapons just to use energy rather than ammo. Although, as you'll see here, unless you're going to go full plasma, ammo is usually more effective per unit. Okay, and here is the infantry subunit armor. A lot of the infantry, including, obviously infantry does, but a lot of the other infantry units, subunit types do as well share these armor. If you're on a planet where there's no environmental hazards, you may be able to get armor as low as none. If there's environmental hazards, like you need filters to breathe the air, or you need thermosuits to stay warm, you'll be paying a slight IP cost to wear those mods. But those are basically none as well. They just cost a little bit for your guys to go outside. If you're in a place that's basically space, your units will default to envirosuits, which is the sort of the weakest of armor that provides some armor strength, which is in this game is basically HP. So armor strength is HP. Until you research padded, you basically have no armor thickness. And then there's sort of this gentle upward slope of armor thickness and armor strength as you move deeper and deeper into the game. The one weird exception here is the personal shield generator, which obviously doesn't provide any armor because it's a shield, and has slightly lower armor strength than battle dress. However, I do believe it activates shield rules for your infantry, which is a whole complicated can of worms that we're not going to get into very much here. But you do have the shield type bonus, so it will make your unit significantly resistant to things like conventional weapons. So your bullets, your lasers, your hollow weapons, or hollow shape charge weapons like bazookas and beam weapons, for example. Whether that's enough to warrant using high-tech parts to build your infantry is a different discussion. I also have here, with the single mark here, heavy combat armor. Heavy combat armor is probably the lightest armor that gets full. Is the lightest armor that gets full amulet coating. It's also the lightest armor you want everyone to be equipped with, ideally. So if you until you tech up to heavy combat armor, you'll be stuck with the lower tier armor. But once you've got heavy combat armor, you probably want everyone in at least heavy combat armor if they can't wear it. Battle dress gets a little bit more complicated because it requires machine parts. Personal shield generator is a little more complicated because it requires high-tech parts. But you do probably want to at least get to heavy combat armor. And here is sort of the caliber table. So, of the previous couple slides, you saw, if you were looking, you saw we had penetration for the weapons, and we had armor thickness on the armor. So when infantry is fighting infantry, this is sort of what the caliber table looks like with the various infantry weapons. Standard kinetic has 20 millimeters of penetration. This means it gets full damage up to padded, does half damage to combat armor, does third damage to heavy combat armor, and does even less to battle dress. Gauss and Charge Gauss at some point got buffed, so they have extra penetration than the rest of the kinetics, with 25 and 30 millimeter respectively. Lasers also have 30 millimeter. So you can see that that's going to cause them to do a little bit better damage against higher armor weights. Notably, this is one of the reasons why I would definitely recommend going heavy combat armor on all your infantry as soon as you can, because anything that basically isn't carrying plasma is going to be doing half damage to you in the infantry standpoint. So in the infantry versus infantry battle, late game, they're sort of hitting each other with sort of like Nerf bats. They don't do very much damage to each other, and that's part of the combined arms effect of the game. You bring infantry in to hold ground, because infantry is really hard to get rid of. It doesn't necessarily do a lot of damage, the most basic subunits of infantry. But once you've got them in decent armor, like heavy combat armor, they can be really hard to get out of a position without bringing in specialized equipment. And specialized equipment tends to be a little bit more fewer and farther between. And this is because of how the armor effects play. So moving on from regular infantry, we have robotic infantry, which, for all intents and purposes, is a drop-in replacement for infantry. So if you've designed a robotic infantry, it will drop into units as a drop-in replacement to infantry. You don't have to design new units for them. You may want to subjugate or separate your robotic infantry out into separate units for various reasons. Particularly, while they share similar modifiers as infantry, they also have an additional autonomy modifier that make it worse than infantry, particularly at attacking. Instead of eating food, they eat energy. We had a little bit of discussion earlier where energy is a lot easier to ship to units in the front. So while they eat more energy than food, than the sort of normal subunits food consumption, energy doesn't have a cost to ship. Meaning if they're in logistics, even the barest of logistics, they'll meet their energy requirements. So robotic infantry, particularly with energy weapons, can be in very, very poor logistical situations and operate at 100% effectiveness. They cost one high-tech part instead of 100 soldiers. So depending upon what's going on in your game, that might either be incredibly expensive, because high-tech parts are rare and expensive, or incredibly cheap, because humans are rare and expensive, and you have a high-tech factory churning out the high-tech parts by the hundreds. It is the only regular autonomous unit that can move and attack, as either other autonomous units are either stationary, because they're turrets, or they're Galactic Republic units that are non-regular. Notably, the only difference this has from normal infantry from a sort of component standpoint is you can't run anything lower than combat armor, although if you're this late in the game, you probably don't want to run anything lower than heavy combat armor anyway. So them not being able to run no armor is probably not a problem. Okay. Now that we've covered infantry, we're into the machine guns, or machine gun infantry. And once again, shares similar modifiers as infantry. Importantly, shares all its armor options. So for the purposes of defensive stats, survivability stats, it has the same stats as infantry. It gets an additional penalty to reducing firepower by an additional 50% for attacking and hard defense. All advanced MGs, so every MG beyond the first one is unlocked by researching advanced MGs. And then whatever combo you normally would have required for the small arms. So it's the small arm tech and advanced MG gives you the advanced MG version of all those weapons. All the advanced MGs have a base AA of 4 versus low, which means MGs are your first early anti-air unit. On average, their weapons MG have 3 times the firepower of a base infantry weapon, while using about 10 times the ammo or 3 times the energy per combat turn. Interestingly, this does make them better both on the attack and the defense than generic infantry, at the cost of additional ammo usage, although being far better at soft defense than anything else, because that 3 times firepower isn't penalized while defending, where in other situations it's penalized by 50%. So 3 times 50% is still 1.5 times better. So if you're willing to pay the ammo, MGs are better than infantry. But you're going to be shooting ammo. They're ammo jumping units. They shoot 10 times the ammo of subunits of the infantry subunits. So here's the MG subunit weapons. You can see same sort of progression with the infantry weapons, except they're machine guns. This is another place where it might be worth transferring over to energy early. This is because if you're comparing it, the MG subunit to the infantry subunit, you have a bigger ammo jump than you have energy jump. So if you're trying to lower logistical costs, swapping your MG units to energy weapons is probably going to get you a better logistical effect than swapping your infantry weapons to energy weapons. Otherwise, they're basically just infantry that just shoot more ammo to compensate for, or to give you more firepower. Going back to sort of my personal biases, I tend to value defensive stats while attacking. MGs have the same defensive stats as infantry, so I'm going to value them about the same when attacking. On the other hand, they have a lot more firepower. So I would argue that MGs are better defending units, even though firepower, which you normally think of as an attacking stat, or an offensive stat, killing someone, is better on the MGs. It particularly makes them better at defense, because they have better firepower for the defense in particular. The bazooka. Once again, shares all the infantry armor options and its penalties to attacking. Notably, however, it replaces the infantry penalties to attacking with a penalty to attacking, or attacking hard with a penalty to attacking soft. And this is because we've done a weapon type swap. We've swapped from small arms to hollow charge, with the exception of the micro nuke. And that's because the micro nuke is one of the lightest atomic weapons in the game. Has higher penetration with everything but heavy RPG, and micro nuke having 100mm penetration. The heavy RPG has 200mm, and the micro nuke actually, I think, it ignores armor penetration entirely and has full damage against everything. Here's the bazooka's subunit weapons. So you see the bazooka, the RPG, the guided RPG, the heavy RPG, and then the micro nuke RPG. So bazooka is what you get whenever you discover the design. RPG is gated behind RPG. Guided is gated behind guided. Heavy is gated behind guided, or heavy as well. And then micro nuke, I believe, is gated behind one of the atomic techs near the end of the tree. Notably, pretty much bigger is better here. with maybe the exception of the micro-nuke RPG, where the radioactives may become prohibitive. But generally, if you can field a heavier RPG, you probably do. And then from a penetration standpoint, once you get into the heavy hollow charge bazookas, you probably have a weapon that at least is going to be vaguely effective against all the tanks. Whether it's light armor, medium armor, assault guns, even the heavy tanks and the monitor tanks. The penetration here is saying, oh, if they're running the maximum armor in the monitor tank, they're going to have their damage mitigated by 50%. When we get into the monitor tanks, we'll revisit this. The bigger a vehicle is, the lower its hit points are versus infantry. So, particularly from the monitor tanks, their hit points are like a fifth of what it would normally be when they're fighting infantry. So the fact that you're getting 50% penetration against the heaviest thing the monitor tank can bring is a little bit of a concern from the monitor tank when you're using bazookas. So don't discount your bazookas as ineffective. If you've got them fully upgraded, they're quite a threat to armored vehicles. And that's basically the state of affairs with bazookas. Motorbike infantry shares all the infantry weapons and penalties, except its penalties you're attacking. Uses oil to move, 0.2 oil per subunit for wheeled type movement, making it far faster in the open terrain than other foot infantry. In exchange, it sadly lacks all armor options heavier than padded envirosuit. Even no shield equipment. It is a recon unit, which gives better recon points per subunit, 7 times that of normal infantry. Some people have proposed potentially using these guys as attacking units. My biased, actually, defensive stats when attacking makes these guys real bad at attacking, because they're so squishy with no armor upgrades. Early game, these guys will be okay because you don't have anything heavier than padded envirosuit anyway. But eventually, these guys they're not getting armor upgrades, so they have that sort of problem. They're recon units. They're kind of overshined by other later recon units in the game. But they do get all the weapons, so they can still hurt, especially if the enemy gets caught out of position. And they are quite mobile, so if you need good reconnaissance and you're just trying to sort of zoom around and get an idea of where things are, motorbikes can be useful for that, at the cost of your spending people. So if you've got a glut of people and you've got a shortage of equipment, motorbikes can be good. And just to reinforce how terrible the armor situation is, this is their armor. None environmental mods, envirosuit, padded envirosuit. That's all they get. And from an armor standpoint, for that armor thickness, 20 millimeters really only means you're getting reduced damage from the lightest of artillery pieces. Everything direct fire has 20 millimeters or more, so most of the stuff they'll be fighting are going to basically ignore your armor thickness, and it's just going to come down to armor strength. And 100 is not a lot. Jetpack infantry shares all the infantry weapons and penalties once again, except its penalty of attacking soft and gets a weaker penalty to attacking hard. Jetpacks also remove some of the terrain malices, so if you're trying to fight up escarpments and stuff like that, something that's a little bit more common on moons, they can be very useful there. They lack any armor option heavier than heavy combat armor, even no shield generator. They are also a recon unit, giving it a better recon points per subunit of 7 times that normal infantry. At least these guys get heavy combat armor. So I definitely would run these guys a little bit more than the motorbike infantry. They are slower moving than the motorbike infantry, but these guys specialize in difficult terrain. So whereas the motorbikes specialize in open terrain, where you might actually want some defensive stats, jetpack infantry can sort of be darting in and out of terrain that's like heavy mountains and stuff like that, where other units maybe don't operate as well. And at least their heavy combat armor is probably going to be enough. And here's the armor list. We've pretty much been over this before, because this is the same sort of armor list as the regular infantry, just without the last 3 options. And Madpad. Madpad shares all the infantry armor options, is an infantry dedicated AA unit. It has 3 weapon choices: Manpad, Heavy Manpad, and Super Heavy Manpad, which are unlocked by Guided RPG, Heavy Guided RPG, and Missiles, respectively. Provide 40, 50, and 60 air power, respectively, with a 0%, 25%, 50% firepower effectiveness against high-altitude air attacks, respectively. In a ground fight, it's basically a bazooka. Really bad bazooka. It does, with that firepower, specifically if you're picking up the slightly larger models, so the heavy model and the super heavy model, propose a realistic threat to air attacks on its hex. So these guys are particularly threatening to air units. Maybe at the end of the day, not super valuable as AA units because they only defend the hex that they're in. They're not a ranged AA unit like some of the later ones can be. They do provide better AA defense than the machine guns, and aren't restricted to shooting low altitude aircraft. Although you do have to be running the heavier variants on the weapons there. Whereas the machine guns are restricted to the low altitude aircraft. Although it is sometimes going to surprise people when they come in for a strafing run and the machine gun opens fire on them. Whereas the manpads are probably, well, unless they haven't been detected, are probably going to be a little bit of a surprise, because these guys do hurt aircraft. Aircraft are not particularly tanky. And that's all the infantry. Okay, and here's the gun section. Gun section is divided up into 5 different guns. We got the quad MG, the automated MG, the anti-tank gun, the artillery gun, and the flak gun. So quad MG shares very similar modifiers to MG, shares all its armor up options, gains additional penalty to attack actions of 33, or to movement actions of 33 action point cost, has larger MG penalties, and classed as a gun for trained movement and defense purposes. All advanced MGs have 20 AA versus low, although they're technically doing 4 attacks, so it's divided across 4 attacks instead of 1. This basically means it's rolling the dice 4 times against aircraft, and ground targets as well. The weapon on average has 3 times the firepower of MGs, while using about 4 times the ammo or 4 times the energy per combat turn. Interestingly enough, this also still, much like MGs versus infantry, quad MGs versus MGs are going to be better even on the attack than other MGs, because they're shooting more, right? From a firepower perspective, they got 3 times the firepower. Their additional penalty to attack is another 50% penalty, so they're still 1.5 times better than MGs. The ammo cost jump is less severe at only about 4 times more, although 4 times more ammo. And when we get to the weapon list on this, you'll see the ammo is starting to get pretty large from a consumption standpoint. But if you just want to sort of mag dump the enemy with ammunition, quad MGs will do that even better than the MG as well. Again, firepower value on the defense. Very much these are very good defending units because they can, while they might not survive a battle if the enemy is coming in to attack them, they're putting enough firepower out there, going to at least inflict casualties on the enemy. And here's their list of subunits, subunit weapons. Again, sort of gentle progression going up. Notably, like, if you're looking at just the base MG, right? The base infantry slug thrower was 50 firepower. I think it was 50 firepower. I think that's one of the scenarios where actually the jump to the MG wasn't quite such a big jump. The base MG is 100. Here we're up to 300, so you're getting a lot of firepower. Although you are at the point where you're doing multiple attacks here, so it's technically firepower base. This is divided across 4 attacks. So you're a little bit less likely on any given attack to hit, but you do get 4 attacks a combat round, so a lot more dice rolls. And then you can see the energy, the ammo consumption has jumped up quite a bit, using up to 65 ammo per combat round, sort of base here. Meaning these guys can drink a lot of ammo, and that can put a lot of strain if you're running ammo on your logistical lines. Again, probably another good candidate for jumping to energy weapons if you are concerned about logistical issues. Here's the automated MG. So this is basically if the robot infantry got mixed to the MG. This is at this point is a turret. So this is a stationary turret unit. Can only be moved via strategic movement, restricting to roads and rails with sufficient logistical capacity. Uses tank-style armor and AT rules for HP. You can see the AT rule effect here with the HP, where the I here stands for its HP versus infantry, and this is its HP versus other targets. Again, shares similar modifiers to MGs. Being a autonomous unit, has an autonomy modifier, which makes it worse at attacking. Particularly at attacking, it makes it worse overall. Being a robotic unit, it eats energy instead of food and costs a high-tech part instead of soldiers. This is actually one of the weirder units in that it can use tank armor without being a tank. I believe this is also classified as a soft target for defensive purposes. Up until this point, we've been talking about only soft hits, so all the infantry are soft. All the guns, I believe, are soft. The automated MG is also classed as gun for defense purposes. The other turret is classed as tank. So we'll get to that later. Here is the automated MG's armor options. It does wear tank armor, so it's the first vehicle where you're going to see steel plating, polymer plating, and liquid armor as options. Up to you whether or not you want to spend metal and IP, or rare and IP, or metal IP and high tech. You're probably, because these guys are stationary, you're going to stick to steel plating. Anti-tank. So this is basically a tank gun, not on a tank chassis. So it follows AT rules. AT rules here actually being anti-tank rules, so that makes sense. The anti-tank follows the anti-tank rules. Focuses on hard attack and defense. Gets an additional penalty to action points that scales with gun size, and is classified as a gun for terrain and movement defense. They are all high-velocity guns, no laser or plasma guns here. Uses infantry armor. So, pretty good anti-tank weapon, which isn't surprising because it's an anti-tank. Here's the list of all the anti-tank weapon sizes. We can see that, obviously, as the gun gets bigger, the action point cost goes up. The ammo consumption goes up as well. Penetration here is fairly straightforward. It's the gun caliber. That's going to be the case with all weapons where you can see the caliber. The caliber is the penetration. And all the weapons require high-velocity gun tech, so to even discover the anti-tank, you have to have developed high-velocity guns. And this is the caliber table, so this is an anti-tank versus a smattering of different types of armor. Vehicles obviously min at 5mm of armor, and you can go up to 400mm of tank armor on the monitor tanks. So the smallest guns, the 25mm ones, are going to struggle against anything that's actually got any real armor on them. I believe when I space these out, this isn't all the caliber penetrations, but these are the well, 25 is the smallest. I think 25 actually plays by special rules where it's classed as foot for movement purposes. The rest are the biggest gun that you can have at a particular tech level. So I believe this is 2, 3, 4, and 5 as far as the tech level unlocks are concerned. So if you're taking an advanced start tech game where you're starting at tech level 5, you have access to all of these. If you do a 4, you have access to this. If you have a 3, you have access to this. You actually can't start at level lower than 3, but this gives you an idea of why you might want to go to the 150mm rate. So the 88mm is going to handle all your vehicles, or all your light vehicles, the lighter tanks, so the tanks, the buggies, the APCs, pretty well. It's going to start struggling with medium tanks, at least medium tanks that are running full armor. Then you have the 150mm penetration, the 240mm penetration, and you can sort of see this general climb here. Once you've got access to the 300mm anti-tank weapons, yes, in theory, they're probably going to struggle against the 400mm, well, struggle in comparison, right? Against the 400mm monitor tanks. Because I believe the anti-tank guns, because they're following anti-tank rules, aren't classed as infantry. So they're still going to have to target the monitor tank's higher HP pool. But you're getting decent penetration against the monitor tanks even. So 300mm penetration is nothing to sneeze at. They're pretty effective against all armor. Then we get into artillery. So artillery are all howitzers, no laser or plasma guns here. Much like the anti-tank, they get additional penalty to action points that scale with gun size. They use infantry armor. Is the first ranged unit in this overview with a range of 1. Has between 2 and 7 attacks based on size, which the firepower gets divided over. So here's how that breaks down. And if you're wondering what the firepower base versus attacks are, this is what it is. So you're getting something like 200 to 100-ish firepower per attack. And yes, up to 7 attacks. Also, again, a good way if you want to convert ammo into damage, artillery are pretty good success for that. Penetration caliber weapons for artillery, if used in a direct fire roll, or what's listed. If used in a ranged fire roll, you divide by 3. So here is the caliber table, assuming ranged combat. You could just reuse the table for the anti-tank table if you're thinking about direct combat. And this is compared against infantry. So you can see that you probably want to focus on the bigger guns, because you probably want to get your full penetration value here. And if you're just going to the smaller ones, which are the more mobile guns, if you're trying to sort of have people tow them around instead of having vehicles tow them around, you may want to use smaller guns specifically for moving them around on foot. But the bigger guns are going to be able to get more penetration, especially if you're using them in a ranged combat roll instead of direct fire roll. And then we have Flak, which shares all the infantry armor options. This is the gun class's dedicated AA unit. Again, has a movement penalty based on gun size. Has a much smaller weapon choice selection with 50mm, 88mm, 100mm, and twin 100mm. Providing 100, 200, 300, and 400 AA firepower respectively, with a 50%, 75%, or 100% firepower effectiveness to high-altitude air attacks. Both 100mm have the 100% effectiveness. In ground fights, it's a fairly balanced gun class weapon, lacking the specials of artillery or anti-tank. And to be fair, you're probably bringing these in for AA duty. These are also the first AA unit to have an AA range, with an AA range of 1. So if there's an air attack happening in the next hex over, they can shoot the aircraft in that hex. And at that point, I believe that is all the soft units as far as the overview is concerned. I'm pretty sure the automated MG is a soft unit. I'm pretty sure all the units we're going to cover from here on out are classed either as hard units or air units, depending upon where you catch them. I think if you shoot up air units on the ground, like say they're sitting in the air base with artillery or something like that, they're classed as hard. So now we move into our first of the hard subsections, which is the motorized section, which is trucks, and only trucks at the moment. Pretty much everything else you'd think probably would sneak into the motorized section actually sneaks into the tank section. So we'll probably be meeting those later in the presentation. So here's the truck, one of the only 2 towing units. It lacks guns and or armor. It gets an AP penalty or bonus based on the weight, or the ratio of weight to engine power. As far as I can tell in the blueprint, gravity doesn't really have an effect. I don't know if the weight of the towed object affects it either. It is implied in the manual that the blueprint has a dummy weight in it. It might be that the dummy weight isn't being adequately modified by gravity. This is one of the few subunits with a very large pop divider with pop divider 5. So that means 5 of these subunits eat 1 food. Of course, minimum 1 food consumption. If you recruit 5 of these at once, they'll cost 1 unit of manpower, which is 100 manpower, instead of costing 500, which would be the default for most subunits. Also has a pretty wide selection of engines. basically being able to run all the engines, which is a bit of a rarity when it comes amongst the motorized vehicles. Here is the truck engines, the power to weight ratio, at least in blueprints, their cost, and their fuel cost per hex. As a general rule, the oil engines will be a little bit more powerful than their equivalent electric. And it is pretty common for vehicles to have some combination of diesel and electric as options. Nuclear is actually fairly rare. And the truck is unusual in that it's one of the lighter vehicles that has the nuclear engine. It tends to be reserved for very heavy tanks. Talking of tanks, next section is the tank subsection. Way too many items in the tank subsection to list, as anything that could have tank armor on it except for the automated MG that doesn't walk sits in this section. So walkers are special, and a lot of weapons that you might not think of as a tank, because it carries tank armor, at least for defense purposes, is classed as tank. So talking about the automated weapons, here we have the automated turret. Sort of functions as if the automated MG and the monitor tank had a baby. Has basically every single weapon selection choice and armor selection choice that the monitor tank has. It is an autonomous weapon, which means there's an autonomy modifier that makes it worse both on the attack and the defense relative to tanks of similar size. It is autonomous, so it eats energy instead of food. Uses high-tech parts instead of soldiers to build. And outside of exactly one gun, is basically a potential monitor tank, although it is autonomous and is incapable of moving except by strategic movement. So as a stationary turret unit, can only use strategic movement restricting to roads and rails with sufficient logistical capacity. And if you really heavily armor these things up, they can be a little bit hard to move on basically anything but rail. And then even then, we'll need pretty serious rail segments to get these moving. These can mount really large guns. The one weapon that is missing that the monitor tank has is the atomic launcher. There are no atomics on this turret. Then we get into the recon buggy, which arguably is a little bit earlier in the tech tree. This is unlocked usually at game start. As you can see, runs up to heavy diesel engine and double electric engine. Carries basically all the options of the machine guns, shares most of the similar penalties, but without the infantry's penalty to attacking. Again, advanced machine guns, so everything requires advanced machine guns and up, whereas the machine guns concerned provide base for AA versus low. I've definitely run into and been surprised by that in the past, having my fighter bombers attack these things and getting them shot up. It's a recon subunit with a recon value of 7, putting it up in the sort of the golden tier of recon units that share 7. Most recon units have less than that. Uses up to 50mm tank armor on a wheeled chassis. Has a pop divider of 3, so not as high of a pop divider as the trucks, but it's got a pretty decent pop divider of 3. 3 subunits thus eat 1 food, with a minute consumption of 1. Good early game recon. That's what these guys are. Here's the APC. Shares similar modifiers to the recon buggy, and can tow like a truck. Again, all the advanced MGs, or all the MG options on it. Has a recon of a subunit with 5, so not quite as good as the recon buggy, but in this case it's a towing vehicle. So it's sort of like a mix between a truck and a recon buggy in practicality, right? So it provides extra recon, provides all the bonuses the truck does. Can carry up to 100mm tank armor on a tracked chassis. Has a pop divider of 3, similar to the recon buggy, meaning 3 subunits will eat 1 food, and if you recruit 3 at a time, they'll only cost 100 manpower. Though minimum consumption of 1 food, I believe minimum consumption of 1 manpower unit if you are recruiting less than 3. Notably, with 100mm of armor, they're going to have roughly the same sort of armor thickness for caliber table as battle dress infantry. So, do combo well with battle dress. Usually used sort of as an armored truck. light tank. This is the first real tank available. Can use guns up to 60mm, kinetic, so howitzer or high velocity. Light laser, which is 100mm equivalent, or light plasma, which is a 200mm equivalent, is a recon subunit with a recon value of 4, which it shares with mechanized quad MG. Uses tank armor that caps at 50mm. Engine maxes at heavy diesel or double electric. Can be used early game as a tank, or late game as sort of an armored recon with a bite. Because unlike the recon buggy, which is maxing out with the laser, or with the plasma MGs, this has got light plasma blaster. The light plasma gun here has 200mm of penetration versus the recon buggy's 50, which can make it quite threatening to heavily armored tanks. Okay, so here's the light tank weapon sizes. As you can see, as a general rule, we got the howitzer guns, the high velocity guns, and the laser and plasma. The howitzers, as we said earlier, have penetration roughly equivalent to their stated caliber size. The light laser gun has a penetration of 100, and the light plasma blaster has a penetration of 200. As a general rule, you'll sort of see these sort of weapon type modifiers. So the howitzers are running a 50% malice to hard attack. The high velocity guns are running a minus 75% modifier to soft attack. And this is attack and defense. And the lasers run a slightly weaker one of minus 50% against soft attack, making them the energy ones, the laser and the plasma, a little bit more all around than the high velocity guns, although they may still underperform equivalently so towards soft targets in comparison to the howitzer. So we also see that as a general rule, as the guns get bigger, they have better firepower, although I think that makes the guns a little bit more expensive as well. And you can also see this is much like we have with infantry when you're comparing sort of the howitzers and the high velocity guns to the light laser guns. If you add actinic tip ammo and hyper explosive ammo into it, you are looking at a situation where the kinetics are just a little bit better than the laser guns. But this is before applying their weapon type modifier, which definitely makes the laser guns more all around than howitzers high velocity, and you have a higher penetration. So if you're coming up against something where the armor makes a difference, that makes the difference. As we're going to see here on the table. So that 200mm light plasma is going to get full penetration up to 200mm plating, which is the heaviest that medium tanks can carry. So late game, these things can be a threat all the way up and into the medium tanks. And honestly, with 200mm penetration, they can be a threat up to monitor tanks. The monitor tanks are probably going to wipe the floor with them for other reasons that we'll get to, mostly HP reasons. But they can still be a threat. Like 50% penetration nerf is not that bad of a nerf as far as penetration comes. And then the light laser, right? That's 100mm penetration. That's enough to deal with battle stress. So don't underestimate the effectiveness of light tanks, even after their armor is starting to get a bit weak. 50mm armor plating is a little on the weak side. Here we have medium tank. So medium tank gets basically 2 improvements over the light tank. You get a bigger potential gun. You can go up to 105mm kinetics, so that's howitzers or high velocities. You now get medium laser guns, which are 200mm lasers, and medium plasma, which is 400mm equivalent. The recon does drop again, so it's no longer 5, it's 3, which it shares with assault guns and mechanized artillery. Uses medium tank armor, again, that gets up to 200mm, and engines max at a double diesel and triple electric. Notably, this is the biggest electric engine, so if you want to be running electric engines on your tanks, any tank bigger than this is not going to be able to get a bigger engine. Okay, and here we have medium tank weapon sizes. So to make this all fit on one slide, we've sort of excluded all but the heaviest of the light tank weapons, which it has all the lighter light tank weapons as well, but if you're moving up to the medium tanks, you're probably going to want to use at least the largest light tank weapons, if not larger. You can see, as a general rule, as guns get bigger, you get more base firepower. The sort of trend here continues where the howitzers have a malice to hard attack, the high velocity guns have a malice to soft attack, and the lasers have a weaker malice to soft attack than the high velocity guns, which makes them a little bit better and a little bit more all around than the high velocity guns. And unlike the light tank weapons, we now have the first laser gun that will unequivocally have more base firepower, once accounting for actinic tip ammo and hyper explosive ammo than the kinetic option. So if you add 50% more to the 600, that's 900. That still means that on some planets, once you apply the atmospheric effects, that the kinetic weapons will maybe still be a little bit better. But once you add penetration to that, you're looking at a situation where you're pretty comfortable just to switch over to laser weapons on these medium tanks. Here's a caliber table again. Left off the guns that it shares with the light tank, except for the 60mm pen to give you an idea of what the light's largest gun would be. So notably here, now with the medium plasma, you have maximum penetration on the maximum armor on the monitor tanks. So medium tanks, especially with the late game plasma weapons, can basically be a threat to all armor, although bigger armor units will probably still outperform them in armor versus armor engagements. But as sort of an all-around unit, the medium tanks work really well. And then we get into assault guns, which is basically a medium tank. Notably, however, medium tanks trade half their hard attack, and I mean hard attack, so it's not hard defense, it's just hard attack, for half price on industrial power. So it also functions as a drop-in replacement to medium tanks, like robotic infantry for infantry. Again, this can be useful if you're having an industry IP production limitation. That's the only savings you're getting here is IP. So depending on how you're playing, IP, at least the IP for the subunits might become a little trivial late game when you're trying to work through mountains and stuff like that. Difficult terrain. Because what you're doing is having to build enough industry to build through mountains and stuff. So assault guns tend to see a little bit less use than medium tanks, which is actually their prerequisite. You need to research medium tanks before you can research assault guns. Here's heavy tanks. Once more, we've got another size jump. Guns get up to 180mm kinetic, so that's howitzers, a high velocity. You get heavy laser and or you get heavy lasers and beam guns, which are both 300mm equivalent, and you get heavy plasma, which is 600mm equivalent. At this point, with plasma, you're up to so large of caliber that you really aren't caring about caliber anymore. Once you're past 400, nothing has more than 400mm of armor. So you're just getting into the game's equivalent that bigger is better. So it's a 600mm equivalent gun, but from a caliber standpoint, anything past 400 is more than you need. Uses heavy tank armor that caps out at 300mm. Not the heaviest armor, but it's the heaviest armor you can get in anything short of a monitor tank. Engines max at triple diesel, triple electric. This is the first of the tanks that get the nuclear engine. This is the tank you probably most likely want to use when you're defeating tanks. Potentially, with the exception of fighting monitors. Notable thing to remember is tanks get less hit points against infantry than they do against other armored vehicles. So as your tank gets bigger, their weakness to infantry gets bigger, and the strength against other tanks gets bigger because they get more hit points. So you've got the penetration to punch up if you need to, but you're still probably going to be outperformed, at least on tank and tank engagements with the bigger tank. And here is the heavy tank weapon sizes. Again, just to save on slide space here, we've not included all but the heaviest of the medium tank weapons and the heavy tank weapons. It does share all the medium tank weapons again, and you see sort of general progression. Bigger guns are bigger, provide more firepower, slightly consume a little bit more ammo or energy depending upon the type of gun. Penetration follows the sort of same curves as we brought up before. And the howitzers have a weapon type penalty to hard, weapon type penalty to soft from the high velocity guns, and those energy weapons are sort of a balance of the two, where they're a little bit less on both extremes. Notably, we are reaching at the point here with the plasma blasts, where all the plasma weapons from this point on are going to be over the sort of minimum penetration requirements to just penetrate everything in the game. 400mm is all the armor. And this is also the first vehicle that we have with a beam gun. And you can see the beam gun is sort of a halfway point between the laser guns and the plasma mass guns. And here we go again. Here's the caliber table, sort of the new guns that weren't existing in the previous tier. And at this point, you can see heavy plasma, medium plasma. We're getting maximum penetration against everything. The heavy laser is getting pretty reliable penetration against everything, and is just a little short in that monitor armor. And the kinetics at this point are still starting to struggle. Kinetics don't scale up quite as fast or quite as high as the non-kinetic options in the late game. Tank Destroyer. This is the assault gun version of the heavy tank. Pretty much all that needs to be said there. Again, trades half its heart attack for half price in IP. Drop-in replacement for heavy tanks like robotic infantry is for infantry. Modern tank. So these are the really, really big tanks. Can use kinetic guns up to 300mm, so I can basically use a full-sized kinetic guns. Can use very heavy laser, which is the 400mm equivalent on laser, or combined beam guns, which is 600mm beam guns, or up to very heavy plasma, which is 800mm equivalent, or the tactical nuke grenade launcher, which simply just ignores all armor entirely. From a caliber standpoint, uses heavy tank armor that caps out at 400mm. This is the game maximum thickness for armor, so when you're thinking, oh, do I have enough caliber penetration to get through something? 400 is probably the upper limit where you're going to start carrying. Past there, you're starting to think about shield and stuff like that don't really have caliber modifiers. Once again, the engine maxes out with triple diesel, triple electric, although we can now get up to triple nuclear. This is the tank you use when you want to just delete a location. It likely needs that nuclear engine unless you want to sacrifice either weapons or armor or the ability to move. As you can see on this planet, where I've made this blueprint, with the biggest gun, with the best polymer armor is the lightest of armors, although it's still the 400mm armor variant. Even with the triple nuclear engine, which is the most powerful engine in the game for ground units, it has an action point cost of 25% extra. If I go one slide, I can show you what the same build looks like, but on the most powerful diesel engine. And all of a sudden you've dropped down to plus 90% action points. As a side effect, when you're building these things, if you don't have nuclear engines, and you can get to these before you can do nuclear engines, you may be in a situation where you're going to have to be picking and choosing what you've got. Do you sacrifice the weapons to have good armor and reasonable maneuverability? Do you sacrifice the armor to have reasonable maneuverability and weapons? Or do you sacrifice the ability for the thing to move really much, but give it great weapons and great armor? Otherwise, you need that nuclear engine. And really, this is the only thing that needs the nuclear engine for the extra power. And here we go with the monitor tank weapon sizes. Follow up sort of to the heavy tank weapon sizes. Once again, we've excluded all but the heaviest of the heavy tank weapons. Just keep this slide sort of to fit on the slide. But we've got all the new weapons here, and you can see sort of what almost actually looks like a gentle progression from the smallest modern tank weapons, smallest by the standpoint of new weapons, right, up to the tactical nuke grenade launcher. Pretty much everything that is fundamentally new here has either been shown before, in the case of the howitzer guns and the high-velocity guns, either on the artillery or the high-velocity guns for the anti-tanks. The really new things here are the combined beam gun, the very heavy plasma blasters, and the very heavy laser guns, and of course the tactical nuke grenade launcher. All of them at this point have more penetration than enemies can have armor, and of course the tactical nuke grenade launcher being a nuclear weapon, I believe rolls both by overkill rules and ignores penetration. Also has no weapon type penalties, so you're looking at a weapon that's really good at deleting hexes if you need to delete a hex. It's also very good versus quantity, because of the overkill effect, basically reliably getting it delivering it kills. And yeah, that's sort of the progression from the ammo status. This is one of the new slides for the edited second pass in the editing of this video. This is going to be the last brand new slide, so I hope you enjoy the rest of the video and the rest of the minor edits. Here we go with the mechanized quad MG. So very simple modifiers to quad MG without the infantry's 50% penalty of attacking. All advanced quad MGs have a base 20 AA versus low, although it still is divided over 4 attacks. Is a recon subunit with a recon value of 4. Uses up to 100mm tank armor on a treaded chassis. Engines up to heavy diesel or double electric. And here we are with the mechanized artillery. This is the first ranged unit of the tank chassis, the tank class. You can use howitzers up to 180 millimeters. Firepower gets divided across 2 to 5 attacks based on gun size. Is a recon subunit with a recon value of 3. Uses up to 150 millimeter tank armor on a tread chassis. Engines up to triple diesel or triple electric, which is the largest of the diesel and the largest of the electric engines. Depending on how you equip it, you may need to be running those diesel engines for maximizing the AP cost, although you can probably get away with electric if you're going to thin off on the armor. The lower gun caliber makes it worse than a traditional artillery for ranged attack. Remember to divide by 3 for ranged caliber. But its ability to have native armor makes it a little bit better in supporting regular attacks, where if your supporting troops get driven back and the gun is now exposed to enemy fire, it's a little bit less likely to be destroyed. Here is the mechanized artillery sort of caliber table, both regular and ranged. So the first number, usually the better looking number, is the regular fire on the gun. So if you're bringing it into a normal combat as a supporting subunit, what it would be getting caliber-wise, penetration-wise. Whereas the second one is if you have it in ranged fire, where you're firing in ranged combat and taking that caliber penalty. As a side effect, you can see it pretty much has pretty decent penetration against infantry, although it will start to struggle against battle dress in ranged combat. So you're going to be a little bit more tempted to pull these guys into regular combat, unlike the artillery where you're running 300 millimeter and can bombard them from range that way. Now we get into the second ranged unit of the tank class. The tank class is actually the class that has the most ranged units. This is also the first ranged unit with a hex range of more than 1. Rocket launchers have ranges between 4 and 8 based on rocket size. They can use small rockets, medium rockets, and large rockets. Firepower divided across 4 to 8 attacks based on rocket size. Can be equipped with tank armor up to 150 millimeters, much like the mechanized artillery. Unlike the mechanized artillery, it is not a recon unit, so it has the base recon value of 1. Engines up to double diesel or triple electric, so it gets slightly lighter engines than the mechanized artillery. Attack only, no counterattack. So be a little bit careful using these guys near the front line. They basically can't defend themselves, and if they get caught up in a fight, say they get caught up in a fight with some other unit defensively, they have no defensive fire. Although they can still be used in direct fire rolls. And be careful using them in direct fire rolls, because they have no firepower while defending. They only have firepower when attacking, although they do have really good firepower in attacking. And that penetration can be useful, even when attacking. And here's the missile launchers, the third range unit of the tanks class, and the second range unit with more than 1 hex of range. It has a range between 5 to 8 hexes, based on rocket size. Can use small, medium, large, and plasma missiles, where the range is based on the missile size, plasma missiles being an outlier, even though it is the largest of the missiles being slightly shorter range than the large missiles. Has its firepower divided across 4 to 8 attacks based on missile size, uses up to 150mm tank armor on a tracked chassis. Engines up to triple diesel or triple electric or nuclear engine. Attack only, no counterattack. Once again, careful using these direct fire rolls as they can't defend themselves, only attack. And here is the rocket and missile caliber table, both regular and ranged. Although be careful using them in regular because they have no counterattack defensive capacity. The reason you bring them into regular attack is to get the burst of these two values. With their range, you can probably keep them far enough away to be reliably doing range attack only. As you can see, the rockets have fairly decent stats at hitting things like battle dress, and because of their good range, can be pretty effectively used against infantry. Missiles, on the other hand, because their missiles can both get bigger penetration values and can get up into plasma, are probably the things you want to be using for ranged bombardment against tanks. Although maybe not the small ones. You probably want to be looking at least medium, if not large, for bombardments against the larger tanks. And then plasma, once you unlock plasma, is really good against tanks. Rockets, on the other hand, you probably want to conserve either using direct fire rolls against tanks or fire primarily at infantry. Although most of the targets you'll be shooting in this game are infantry. And all of them will handle your battle dress reasonably well, except for the small rockets here. And even the small rockets, you're probably got enough penetration to reasonably handle early to mid-game infantry. It's when you get into the battle dress units, the small ones are going to start falling off. The SAM launcher. This is the tank's dedicated AA unit, with a range between 3 and 6 hexes based on missile size. Has 3 weapon choices: light, medium, and heavy surface air missiles with 200, 260, and 300 air firepower, respectively. Unlike all previous AA units, has no penalties to attacking air units regardless of size when attacking high air units or low air units. On the other hand, unlike all previous AA units, has no ground attack penalties. Keep it away from enemy ground units, because they'll very happily tear these things to shreds, and the only luck you're going to get is maybe these guys will retreat instead of be destroyed. They've got no soft attack or hard attack. They basically can't defend themselves, and they're, unlike trucks, they're reasonably expensive. The atomic launcher. This is our first dedicated ranged atomic weapon. Range of 5 hexes. Can use 1 megaton and 10 megaton missiles. Firepower divided across 60 or 200 attacks based on rocket size. Uses up to 200mm tank armor on the tread chassis. Engines up to triple diesel, triple electric, or nuclear. Not suitable for direct fire rolls due to high cost. Atomic weapons ignore armor thickness, so you might as well always be firing them in ranged, assuming you can get reconnaissance using something else. Here's the ICBM launcher, which is the final dedicated atomic range unit. Range by default is excessive, allowing it to hit all tiles on the map. So for example, here you can say it's saying 1,398 hexes. This is a planet that's smaller than 400 hexes. It can hit the entire planet. It can basically go around the planet a couple times to hit a target. It's got that level of range. It can use 100 megaton, 500 megaton, and 100 megaton ICBMs, giving you phenomenal range and phenomenal destruction power. Firepower divided across 200, 600, or 1,000 attacks based on missile size. Firepower per attack the same on all missiles, so bigger missiles do more attacks, is effectively how that is treated. Uses up to 400mm tank armor, is attack only, has no counterattack, is immobile, only strategic movement, has sufficient range to hit most targets on the map, even on the largest of maps. Although to move it around, you need to use strategic movement, and you probably want to keep these things hidden. They're not the tankiest of things. And because these are often going to be very far away from the enemy, you probably aren't going to be splurging with the armor unless you think you're going to get these things shot at. And hopefully you're not going to get these things shot at. But yeah, with strategic movement, you can put these in various places. They don't necessarily need to be in the cities where you would otherwise build them. And here we are, getting into the walkers subsection, which includes walkers and heavy walkers. Walker, which is the first of the walker units, uses walker heavy MGs. This is separate from small arm MGs. They have double penetration that regular MGs. I'm not sure if the Gauss changes actually affect these weapons. They may not. Uses up to 150mm tank armor when on a walking chassis. Uses double diesel or triple electric engines. Basically doubles normal firepower than the MG normal equivalent. Has a recon value of 5, making it the armored buggy of walkers. And yeah, this is the main benefit for walkers here is that they can have reduced penalties in comparison to most vehicles in mountainous terrain. In particular, they can move into high mountain, which a lot of wheeled and tracked vehicles cannot. Unless there's a road. Here is the heavy walker. The tank equivalent of walker units can mount up to 180mm guns, heavy laser, beam gun, or heavy plasma. uses up to 200mm tank-style armor on a walking chassis, giving it roughly the equivalent armor of a medium tank, although weapons roughly approximate that of a heavy tank. It can equip the triple diesel engine, triple electric engine, or nuclear engine. It has a recon value of 4, making it sort of the light medium tank of walkers from the reconnaissance standpoint, although its weapons and armor sort of makes it sort of like a medium heavy tank from weapon armor standpoint. The penetration and elite weapons have been discussed earlier, as they're basically repeats of tank weapons, so go look back at those tables if you want to know what the penetration lines up with armor. Here's the protector subsection, mobile shields, wide area shields. So here's the mobile shield. This is the first protector unit and the only mobile one. Can be designed with small, medium, and large shields, which provide 6,000, 12,000, 18,000 armor strength respectively. Armor strength basically just passes through into unit hit points straight through. Shield intercepts attacks on other units, and unless attack from a unit has broken through, hits always make it retreat, or at least this is what the manual says. Some indications I've seen in the forums may imply that that's been changed. I'm not going to get into shield rules here. I'm not that up to experience on them. Against broken through units, the manual also says it has 1/10 the normal hit points, and successful hits always kill instead of retreat. So these can be very useful for protecting other valuable units, although they do use, as you can see here, use high-tech parts and radioactives in production. So they can be a little expensive to build, meaning they need to be protecting something that is equally expensive. A lot of my equipment, a lot of the things I will build in game aren't necessarily expensive enough to warrant protecting with a shield. Here we have the wide area shield. This is the final protecting unit. Has to move around by strategic movement because it is a stationary unit, has no engines, can be designed with very large, and extra large shield generators, providing, as you can see, far more armor strength, which translates directly into hit points again. Similar sort of rules to the mobile one, it's just not mobile. Again, as you make the shield better, you are getting a higher high-tech part to hit point ratio. So if you've got something valuable you want to protect, the wide area shields can be very useful for that. So I could potentially imagine putting wide area shields in places where you put IBCM launchers to protect them from bombardment. Because that's the sort of thing where you're looking at an appropriate cost balance between what you're protecting and what you're using to protect them. Now we're going to get into the aircraft subsection. So this is your helicopters, your thropters, and your fixed-wing aircraft. So aircraft have an airbase requirement based on airframe. That's actually one of the biggest differences between the airframes and the rest of the vehicles, is you get to design and tell your aircraft what they are, and that the airframe, sort of the base model, is just telling them what airbase they can launch from. So the ultralight aircraft can get off of minimum level 1 airbases, light is level 2, medium is level 3, heavy is level 4, and those extra heavy aircraft are level 5. Your vertical takeoff vehicles like helicopters, thopters, and VTOL don't need airbases, although they do benefit from it from an optimal readiness standpoint. When you're talking about air attacks, this is the air attack table from the manual, you're deciding whether the altitude is low or high, and whether the plane is going to try to avoid enemy dogfights. So by default, everything that is not classed as a fighter will attempt to avoid being a dogfight. Doesn't mean you can't arm your tactical bombers and your level bombers with AA missiles or AA guns. And in fact, I do recommend you do arm them with those. But if they can, they will try to disengage from fighters to minimize their damage. And then fighters, sort of by default, are obviously... By default, I think they have dogfighting toggled on, so they will try to seek out air engagements with fighters and bombers and tactical bombers. And if they have enough readiness and haven't used any action points during a turn, they may attempt to sortie to defend your units from airstrike over end turns as well. This also determines the altitude as far as AA bombardment. So recon, fighters, fighter bombers, and tactical bombers are all classed as low altitude for AA purposes. whereas your level bombers and your transporters are classed as high. And here is the ultralight aircraft, the lightest one-engine aircraft frame. Carries wings up to small size, only MGs for air-to-air. Its air-to-ground weapons can be up to 1,000-kilogram bomb hatch and or 100-kilogram precision bombs. Has no VTOL wings. I usually use these recon due to the lower weapon payload maxes. Here's the light aircraft, the medium-sized one-engine aircraft frame, wings up to medium size, all MGs, and up to medium air-to-air missiles. Air-to-ground can have up to 5,000-kilogram bomb hatch, medium rockets, and 300-kilogram precision bombs. I usually use this as fighters due to the lower weapon payload maxes, although fairly sufficient air-to-air weapons for fighter usage. Okay, here we get into the medium aircraft, particularly the first one-engine version. Medium aircraft one-engine is actually the largest one-engine sized aircraft frame. Carries wings up to large size, all the MGs up to heavy air missiles. Air-to-ground can up to 20-kilogram bomb hatches, large rockets, and 500-kilogram precision bombs. Notably, this means... Oh, I've got a typo here. It should be... Oh, no, that's right. I don't have a typo here. This does mean that you can get bigger bomb hatches than you can get precision bombs, although I think that's because that's the largest size precision bombs. I tend to use these as fighter bombers due to the access to heavy rockets, making them decent ground and air attackers, although I usually run them with rockets. The version I have here in the screenshot I have with precision bombs. Here we get the medium aircraft 2-engine. This is the smallest 2-engine aircraft frame. Wings up to very large size, all MGs, up to heavy air-to-air missiles. Air-to-ground can be up to 20,000 kilograms. Heavy rockets, 500-kilogram precision bombs. I tend to use these as the tactical bombers because the little bit of extra thrust from the second engine here can help them carry a larger bomb load than the other medium aircraft. Then we get the heavy aircraft, which is the largest 2-engine frame. Wings up to super large. Largest plane that can use VTOL wings. All cupola, MGs, and very heavy air-to-air missiles again. Air-to-ground can up to the 40k bomb hatch. Notably, we've gotten too big for rockets or precision bombs. So these start to be in the zone where I'm going to use these as tactical bombers, or level bombers, or transports. I won't use these as fighters anymore. And we get the heavy aircraft, smallest 4-engine aircraft frame. Wings up to super large, all the turreted MGs, very heavy air-to-air missiles, up to 80k bomb hatches, no rockets, no precision bombs again. Tend to use these as tactical bombers, level bombers, or transport planes due to the higher carrying capacity of the more engines. Extra heavy 4-engine, basically more bombs. Basically use it the same as I do the other 4-engine aircraft, just more bombs. 6-engine. There's only one frame that has 6 engines. That's this frame. Wings up to super large. Very heavy aircraft missiles. Got the biggest bomb load. Again, tend to use these for either transport plane duty or sort of strategic bombing, level bombing usage. We get the light helicopter. This is the lightest single-engine helicopter in the game. All twin MGs. Air-to-ground can have 200 kilogram or 2,000 kilogram bomb hatch and very small rockets. Usually use them as recon to do range attacks for my ranged, or use them as recon so that I can do better range attacks with my artillery, rockets, and missiles and stuff like that. You want some degree of recon, and sort of buzzing the enemy with these can be a good start off for an artillery bombardment. Medium aircraft. I tend to basically use these like I use the light ones, except these can carry bigger weapons. So sometimes I'll use these in ground attack rolls where I'll put some weapons on them. Again, mostly just machine guns and rockets. It depends on how viable they are on the planet. Because again, these can use slightly bigger helicopter engines, but helicopter engines are sort of pure power to air relations. This means if you're on a planet that doesn't really have good atmosphere or no atmosphere, they're not going to be very effective. But yeah, helicopters, VTOL, pretty nice when you can use them, and you can't use them everywhere. Heavy helicopter, the only helicopter with a double engine, can carry more weapons. Light Thopter, single engine Thopter design, all twin MGs, medium air-to-air missiles, the ability to carry up to 5,000 kilogram bombs or 300 kilogram precision bombs. Again, tend to use them as recon or as sort of fighter bombers if I'm going to carry them with weapons. Medium Thopter, so this is the double engine design, more bombs. Heavy Thopter gets up to 4 engines, can carry bigger weapons. In this planet, this was one of the few examples of a plane that I could not get viable. These guys couldn't even take off on plasma jet. But that's a planet-specific thing. It may work on your planet. It just didn't work on this one. And we're going to go through the caliber tables for all the aircraft weapons. So here is aircraft MGs, aircraft missiles, and aircraft rockets, particularly the air-to-air missiles. So you can see in direct fire roll, the rockets are pretty decent at anti-tank, especially the heavy rockets, whereas the MGs are probably going to do what you need them to do against infantry, although they'll struggle with the more heavily armored infantry. And then the air-to-air missiles are really meant to fight air units anyway. The fact that you can bring them to bear on ground targets is a little bit unnecessary for that sort of discussion, I suppose. Here's the bomb hatch. As you can see, the bomb hatch doesn't have a very large caliber, but you are deploying a lot of firepower with these. So they tend to be very good at hitting infantry units. Probably don't want to use them against tank units, although you can use them, especially the large ones against tank units can be reasonable. And then you get the precision bombs, give you a much better penetration for much lower weight than the bomb hatch. So if you want to be fighting tanks with your fighter bombers or your tactical bombers, you probably want precision bombs on them, not just raw bomb hatches. Raw bomb hatches are better for delivering lots of firepower. These are better for dealing with armor. So if you're dealing with armored targets, bring the precision bombs, bring the rockets. And we'll finish up here with a recap. So subunits are broken into various types for defense purposes. You have infantry, which is probably going to make up the bulk of your units. You have guns, which are all the guns that are too large to be fired or carried. You have the motorized category, which is trucks, and basically trucks. Tanks, which is a very large and inclusive category, which is all the armored hard targets, even if you don't give them armor. Walkers, both walker and heavy walker. Protector, which is the mobile shield and wide area shield units. And then air gets divided up into low and high, although you, as the designer, gets to specify whether a unit is low or high, not the model type. And that's the end of the presentation. So I hope you've enjoyed, if you watched the whole way through, this overview on Shadow Empire subunits. This is, as I brought up earlier, an overview on subunits. At some point I'll probably do an overview on units, which will mostly be an overview on the OOBs, so the orders of battle for all units, which is how you sort of can mix and match them without having to use the customized battle group settings. Also how you would go about using the custom OOBs in-game, orders of battle. And that affects some of the evaluation on some of these subunits, which was something I tried to stay away from. Some of the subunits aren't involved in orders of battle, so you only guys get pure units of them. Some of them are, and when they are, they're much better than when they're separate, and so on and so forth. But yeah, with that, I wish you all the best of luck and a good time. Catch you all in the next part, or in the next video or stream or whatever. And with that, bye for now.